Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first ProDev of 2019. That's fanfare, right? That's all says fanfare right here. I'm Mike Balderrama. I am the regional educator for Counterculture Coffee in Washington, D.C. And I'm joined by my colleagues Lenora and Christy, both from Counterculture. And thank you all for being here. I recognize it's a very nice day out there, so you could be anywhere in the world, but you decided to be here, and that's awesome. We do this as an opportunity to connect with people who are coffee professionals, people in the public, people who know a ton of stuff about coffee, people where this is the first time you've ever even thought about what we're talking about. So it's a great opportunity, so again, really glad you're all here. And we're going on a field trip today. We are learning a little bit more about the coffee supply chain. We also have coffee, cascara. We also have some trail mix because we are on a field trip right now. So I felt like we needed to have some snacks. So feel free to replenish that, grab some water. I really want this to be a fun learning opportunity for all of us. And honestly, just the purpose of Counterculture doing this ProDev, we do it 4 times every year, every quarter. It's the second Wednesday of the last month of the quarter. How complicated is that, right? But it's really an opportunity for us to push our own potential and engage in this idea of peer-to-peer education. So we're not necessarily the experts in all of this material, but we wanted to take some time, dive a little deeper, talk about it a little more, ask questions, raise questions, and maybe provide some answers for folks. So that is the hope. If you've come to a lot of our tastings at 10, if you've come to a lot of our trainings, if you are a certified barista, like 2 people in this crowd, a lot of this might feel like review for you. But the reality is this bears repeating over and over and over again, because the more literate we are about the coffee supply chain, the better we are not only as consumers, but people who work in coffee and tangential to coffee. Getting nods around the room. That feels pretty natural, right? So, cool. What are we doing today? We're going to review how coffee goes from seed to cup. So you're going to hear probably the same information 3 different ways. We're going to talk about from a botany perspective, kind of how does coffee grow, develop, how it's processed, harvested, and brought to the cup of coffee that you're drinking right now. We're going to tell that same story a second way through its movement around the world, and then also some types of purchasing models that you may see. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many different ways this can play out on the field, but we wanted to sort of pinpoint a couple of those contact points that we see as an example. We're going to take a little bit of time thinking about coffee pricing, and we're actually going to look at a breakdown of a single coffee, sort of where the pricing is at which phase throughout its trade. And then we are going to kind of talk about how Counterculture does it, but that's not necessarily the end-all be-all, right? We're going to sort of segue out and kind of do final thoughts, conclusions about where we are with all this information out on the table. Cool. Here we go. Let's talk about coffee in general, right? It's really important, and I think something that we tend to forget. Coffee is the seed of a fruit. And so like all fruit-bearing trees, we have to think about it not only as an agricultural product, but something that has a very unique and specific genetic makeup. This is also predicated on that first quarter coffee that we've been tasting throughout called Field Trip. We're going on a field trip journey today. We are following the coffees movement around the world, but it's also about our own engagement and understanding of the coffee market, the movement of coffee, and our own literacy of the supply chain. We are sort of traveling backwards as a means to go back to that source. So the best way to get some of that knowledge foundation is thinking about how coffee grows, because how coffee grows really dictates how we sell that coffee, buy that coffee. So if you think about, there are lots of different species of this thing called coffea, right? Genetically starts off in Madagascar, something like over 129, maybe even 134 different species of coffee out there. But the 2 that we probably know the most, Arabica and Canephora, aka Robusta, right? Those are the 2 that we consider really to be coffee, that coffee drinking coffee. We're speaking specifically about Arabica today, which originated in, if you look over at that map over there, Ethiopia. This is where we see the most genetic diversity of coffee Arabica. This is where we see kind of as the birthplace and breeding ground for really good coffee. Coffee Arabica, super fragile, super difficult to grow, and as a result is the basis for all and most specialty grade coffee. This species loves wet tropical climates, grows best at high altitudes, and under shade growing trees. So check this out. This is some coffee over here, right? Isn't this cool? Got like demos left to my left and right. This is a coffee tree. It does not grow well in Washington, D.C., as you can probably tell, right? It needs shade-growing trees to filter that light. If I was to leave that out in direct sunlight, boy, those leaves would look like someone put a magnifying glass up to it, like burning an anthill, right? It's so fragile, it's so delicate. All of this to drive home, it's incredibly difficult to grow coffee, hands down. Not only that, when I plant that seed in the ground, not only does it take 2 to 3 years before I even get something that resembles good coffee fruit, but then you kind of have to think about years 4 and 5 for that fruit to be viable enough for me to sell it to market in an effective way. Coffee is difficult to grow. Coffee is difficult to get to market. I don't get to be a coffee farmer tomorrow. It takes time, planning, budgeting, money, and time. You get small berries. Maybe we call them cherries because it kind of looks like the cross between a cranberry and a cherry. It's a dense fruit, and it turns a deep red, maybe sometimes an orange or yellow. There's some really cool variants to this coffee. But the idea here is a rainy season kind of activates some growth. You get a flowering portion. Check this out. See, I'm full of props all the time. This is a coffee blossom. Kind of looks like a jasmine flower or a citrus flower, something like that. Incredibly fragrant. After the heavy rains, those flowers kind of knock off, and anywhere that that flower was is a node where coffee fruit will grow 9 months later. Now, obviously, when things like climate change, which is a reality that coffee farmers are having to face, when you get irregular rainy seasons and half your farm is being activated at different times of the year, or if you get a heavy rain that knocks off those flowers before it gets primed and ready to grow that fruit, you have a real challenge in getting that coffee to market. So we're really just trying to think about this seed to cup journey as a means to say, where are all the possible ways that this can go wrong? I'm not trying to speak about that in a negative way. I'm just saying it's really cool that we get this thing called coffee at the end of the day, because it's really hard to get here in the first place. After those 9 months, when you have those ripe cherries, then you have to have some skilled labor force to come through and pick that coffee. Especially specialty grade coffee requires that keen eye to know when that fruit is ripe. There is definitely a mechanical process that you can do depending on how you set your farm up if you're a producer. So I could bring a machine that brings it through, knocks out all those seeds regardless of ripeness. So I could get green, half ripe, fully ripe, too ripe, sticks, twigs, doesn't matter. Or I can pay folks to come through. Maybe they're part of my farm or my cooperative who come through, pick that fruit, do a first pass, come back a couple days later once some of those fruit are at that full ripeness, come back through again. If I have to think about that, I should be thinking also about my growing and planting cycle with my neighbors. So if you're growing coffee right next to me, maybe we actually get on the phone and say, hey, I'm going to start planting some seeds. You should probably just plant some seeds a couple weeks from now so that we can kind of time out when we harvest our coffee together. Doesn't that sound great? It requires close collaboration with people in your community to get really good, high-quality coffee. Once you've harvested that coffee, you have to make some choices as a producer. How am I going to process my coffee? Remember how I said it's this big, ripe fruit? So there's a big amount of fruit inside, and then on the inside there are 2, usually, seeds. This is what becomes coffee, those seeds inside there. You have to remove the fruit. But around those seeds is this protective, sticky layer we call mucilage. that needs some type of fermentation process to break it down. So most of the coffee that we consume out there is washed processed coffee, where you remove most of that fruit, let it sit and soak somewhere between 12 to 72 hours with microflora, whether that's bacteria or yeast, either from the air or introduced in these tanks. Those tanks sit, begin that fermentation process to break down that mucilage, and then they are guided through channels. Laborers can break it down, whether that's with metal bristle brushes, but that type of agitation that frees up that mucilage, which provides coffee in parchment, which then gets set out onto these big old patios to dry out and get to a certain state of sort of loss of moisture so that they are ready to bag up and ship on out. That's the most usual way that we have engaged with coffee, but there's also natural processed coffees, pulp natural, aka honey processing, right? The point being also, once you've harvested the coffee fruit, you still need to do more work to it before it can even leave your country, right? So some of these processes can take up to 2 weeks, some can be 3 to 5 days. All of that means the minute it is removed from that tree, a clock starts, and quality can potentially be compromised at any phase of this process. You're thinking about how this then makes its way to market. We've got these green samples that are being disseminated, right, to maybe exporters and importers. Maybe roasters are experiencing this coffee. You, as potentially a producer, have to kind of think about who's my viable market? Who am I trying to sell this thing to? In a traditional model, and we'll talk about kind of this idea of traditional versus different model as well, right? I'm kind of describing this process as though I don't have someone who's going to buy that coffee yet. That's a lot of risk on my part, right? I've grown all this coffee, I've produced all this coffee, I've probably paid all of these people to do this work for me, but when am I going to get the coffee money for the coffee I'm about to sell, right? So you're constantly trying to engage with people at different levels of this supply chain, which we'll elaborate on a little further down the road, okay? Let's also kind of talk about, this is not happening all year round too, right? This is an example of, on our website, you can find kind of a seasonality map. You can kind of click through month to month to month to month and see, hey, where is coffee being shipped? Where is it being harvested? When's it on a boat coming around the globe? When does it get to our roasting facility? To really give you a sense that, you know, all of this coffee is growing between the tropics. There are some close equatorial places where it grows twice a year, but you're also talking about a very narrow window of time when this thing is happening in any given place of origin. There is a delicate balance that is happening around the world as you're trying to source and bring in really fresh coffee into the United States or to any country of roast, right? So all this to say, it is a very fragile balance in getting this stuff here. It doesn't take really easy steps along the way. Let's talk about all of these agents and entities within the supply chain. I'm really into this image. Anyone here, I know this is gonna be kind of silly, show of hands, anyone ever do a cappella or sing? Wow, a tough crowd, what? Does it look like I was in a college a cappella group? Probably, right? Yes, and I'm getting nods on that. Okay, I won you back, good. The idea of a shoe is really important when you're singing because I can, if I'm in an arc, I can see the person across from me, I can see the person next to me, I can see everyone in the group, so when we're trying to harmonize, we can all listen to each other, see each other, give each other some nods, that kind of thing. When you're in a chorus line, musical theater, anyone? Man, wow, tough crowd. When you're in a chorus line, when you're in a long line, I can only see the person right next to me, okay? I really love this iconography. We are really trying to revamp, and a lot of the material that we're talking about now is kind of going into our rewrite of Coffee Origins, which is a lab we offer to our wholesale partners. Because the idea here is, depending on the type of supply chain model, each person has the ability to, or not, to see the person next to them or across the way from them. Who can communicate with whom? Who gets to engage with whom? Where do we have that type of communication? Older models kind of have this idea of arrows pointing one way or the other. It gets very like convoluted. You see kind of loops and turns and everything like that. But when you kind of think about it in terms of an odometer or this arc or this shoe, for my a cappella people out there, right? It is the idea of who do I see? Who can I engage with? Who can I talk to? But I really do want to actually take some time to delve into what exactly each of these pieces are, because we throw out the term importer. What does that even mean? Exporter, roaster. I have a sense of what a roaster is, but what do we mean when we say these things? So let me just like kind of go here from point to point to point, because we're going to map on top of that not only roles and responsibilities, but then we're going to map on that coffee story I just told you and whose hand is actually dealing with those pieces. Does that make sense? Feeling nods? Good. All right, what's a grower? In the context of coffee, we're talking about coffee farms, but coffee farms range in size, right? You can have smallholder farms, you can have large factory-sized farms. So even these definitions themselves are incredibly malleable. They change and shift based on an individual coffee you might be sourcing. Although the majority of what we experience with specialty coffee is smallholder farms. What does that even mean? That usually means it's owned by individuals or families who rely on coffee as their primary source of income. That's incredibly important when we start to map on pricing when it comes to coffee, right? These farmers might get the employment of seasonal laborers to assist in harvest, but otherwise manage the land themselves. Huge risk on few people. And when that is your primary source of income, that's an incredibly risky job. Just driving that home. Smallholder farms, though, can band together and create farmer organizations, cooperatives. They can pool their resources together to reduce individual costs incurred farmer to farmer. And when you get to confederate, you get to provide market access. You can negotiate for stronger prices. Not only that, if I'm a smallholder farm who can only produce so much coffee, when I put my coffee together with your farm and your farm and your farm, we have more market access because other entities along this arc have more coffee to buy from. If I am a voracious roaster who really needs a ton of coffee from that region, wouldn't bat an eyelash at just one smallholder farm. But when we pool our resources together, you can fill that need. You can fill that niche. It makes it way more appealing to a potential buyer. The other cool thing about cooperatives is you may get to centralize something like a washing station or a dry mill, which will help absorb costs and spread those costs out among cooperative partners. Distributing financial burden helps alleviate some of that stress from farmer to farmer. The other thing that cooperatives can do is provide collective bargaining. So representatives can use their group's volume, like I said, that volume of goods to negotiate much higher prices than an individual farmer might get by themselves. Also, as a financial liaison with coffee producers, cooperatives get to take a lot of that supply chain risk. So a cool thing that cooperatives sometimes get to do is, hey, let's pool all of our coffee, let's get it ready to market, and you know what? I'm gonna pay you guys a certain amount to tide you over until we find a buyer. So here's some of the money up front, and then once we actually sell all of it at market, we'll catch up with that, and then if we sold it for an even bigger price, here's the remainder that we owe you for all that coffee you gave us. So if you also think about timing out that payment system, cooperatives could potentially kind of foot or front the bill for a smallholder farmer, so you're kind of just getting a little cash in hand until all of that coffee gets sold off. Does that feel good? Is that making sense? Yeah, just like you can sort of split the difference. Here's what we definitely know we're gonna get in a price for this coffee, so here you are for your share, for your share, for your share, and then come back, oh, hey, guess what? We sold it for even more. Here's the remainder that we owe you for that, and we're all square. Way easier. Medium and large-scale farms, on the other hand, typically staff their estates for the entire year and get to house their own coffee in-house at facilities that they own and hold. So depending on the size and scale, you may have to rely on more entities and agents further down the supply chain to potentially store your coffee, process your coffee, do the things that you may not have the infrastructure to do in your own space. Let's now kind of move over to the green zone, exporters, importers. Exporters, I totally, on the walk here, was listening to, do you all listen to NPR's Planet Money podcast? They were talking about middlemen, and it's really easy to hate on this, but they actually provide an essential key role in market supply, market access. There was an economist who quoted it as like, middlemen are just like gravity. There's an inevitability to it, there's an essentialness to it that actually really connects some dots. Now, there are certainly more ethical models, some better models than others, but the reality is this idea of an exporter and importer is a real bridge between farmers, cooperatives, with international purchasing power. Because if you're in a community that's just growing coffee, you're not thinking about a roaster in Durham, North Carolina half the time. You're thinking about farming your coffee, processing your coffee, right? The other cool thing is usually exporters run dry mills. So they can also help process, improve the quality, or just do some quality control and serve as kind of that liaison to your buying group. With dry mills being owned and operated by exporters, you also have a space and a first point of contact to taste and evaluate that coffee. If you don't have the infrastructure at origin to really seriously quality grade or cup your coffee, it's happening over here. It's really helpful in getting a first taste of that coffee because that taste and that quality inspection relates to that price. So the money is seriously at the point of evaluation. I can grow my coffee all day long, but until people are actually tasting it and qualifying it, I don't have a market. It's not going to get bought or sold. Exporters are a crucial role, and I say this over and over again, in financing the supply chain as well. A lot of the goings and comings of the money happens here, right? And the other thing that I want to make very clear is as the coffee is moving from point to point to point, it actually means the transfer of ownership. And that's also very important. If I'm holding it in my facility, I own that coffee. That means the risk is off this person, but it's in my court now. And until I actually put it on a boat and get it over to where it needs to go, it's on me if the facility burns down, something bad happens to it. That risk is off of this person because that money has already been paid. It's been transferred, right? Ownership is a really important thing. This is why contracts are so crucial when you have to think about the coffee supply chain. Where are my contract law people here? No, I know, right? We're like bug-eyed right now. Like, just to think of like reading a coffee contract, fascinating stuff. You should really find one. You can probably pull them up online. They're really, I know I'm saying a silly thing by saying it's a really invigorating read. It's actually really important to kind of think about what that process looks like. The other thing that exporters can also do, they can also sell a lot of products back to farmers. Fertilizers, potentially pesticides, or other types of things can also be sort of presented back if you're thinking about ways of improving potential coffee quality. Exporters are a great role in sort of moving things back down the supply chain as well, potentially, right? So those are some other services that potentially that kind of middle group could provide. When we think about from an importing standpoint, so what is an importer versus an exporter? Importers are the logistics people. They're the ones who have to figure out how to coordinate that movement of the coffee from its port of export to its port of entry. So if we kind of go back, if this is, coffee growing countries of origin, this is where it has to go. Importers are responsible for all the other stuff. How does it get from point A to point B? They really have to gauge how green coffee's price is based on the coffee's value once it leaves that country of origin. So a big term we throw around, FOB. Show of hands if you've heard me yell the word FOB before. Thank you, Lenora. FOB, free on board, freight on board, that kind of thing. That is a standard way of evaluating the price of a coffee. It's really saying, here's how much that coffee was valued at when it was ready to leave its port of exit before it makes it into port of entry. It's a line in the sand. It's not the price of the coffee. And we'll dial that back. We'll actually kind of break down the price of a coffee. But FOB is a good standard way of saying, hey, how much is this coffee valued at when it's ready to leave the country? That's in the purview of that importer. Importers connect those coffees to roasters very often. They can sell them directly or initiate intergroup communications or figure out destinations. And sometimes importers can kind of facilitate and hold coffee and then sell it off after a certain point as well. And we'll talk more about what that model looks like as well. There are tons of hazards when it comes to international shipping. I've ordered so many things DHL that never arrive, right? So many things can go wrong on the high seas, right? These are put into giant shipping containers. If you didn't pack it right, or if you packed it to the wrong stuff, the quality of that coffee can go down. There's a lot of risky things, possible cross-contamination, you name it, right? So importers really incur a huge amount of risk in the transit of coffee from nation to nation. All right, moving on to roaster. Talk a little bit less about us, but still, we acquire coffee from importers and supply consumers with the product. It's really important to kind of state that. We are the supply chain partner with the highest visibility to customers. So that's a big risk and a sense of importance that we have to put on ourselves, because we're the ones who have to absorb that communication to consumers about everything that's transpired up until that point. That's a big responsibility on our parts, you would hope, right? The roaster has to assess how to present that coffee to the public in order for it to sell. We've bought all that coffee, but how do we get that over the finish line? How do we get it into the hands of the consumers? How do we get it into the hands of the wholesalers? How do we brew it right? We always talk about that too. Think of all those hands that coffee has touched, and how many times have I made a terrible pour over? All the time, right? That risk and that stress is on us to make people to want to drink that coffee. That is a big responsibility and burden because it's so close to being consumed. Just that little step right over the finish line. And certainly our ability to develop consistency and quality with our coffee really determines kind of the strength of those businesses' sales channels, right? Because if people think you've made a really bad cup of coffee, it reflects poorly on that coffee. And that's a really hard thing to swallow sometimes. So, as we are thinking about the movement, I really like thinking about kind of what is happening with each entity along the way. So let's map that kind of seed to cup journey on top of all of those entities that I just talked about, right? So that farmer is dealing with that harvest and cultivation, moves to kind of a dry mill. Maybe that's a larger organization. Maybe it's happening on site. Again, lots of complexities within this model. It's getting collected, pooled together. Maybe it's being separated, you name it. But then maybe dry mill, getting to port of export, being popped into a shipping container, put on a boat. Very often it's going on a boat. Importer, port of import. They can also store coffee sort of at warehouses. Baltimore is a great spot for it. South Carolina, there are lots of ports of entry. Bay Area, we have to think about that too for our roasting facility on the West Coast. It is moving all over, and that's just the US model. Don't know about Denmark, but it's coming into port. It's getting shipped, again, transportation risks. Once it makes it to us, we have our own warehouse, temperature stability, climate control. We're roasting it, we're packaging it, and then it's coming to the consumer. Very easy, quick way of kind of articulating this. Not only that, I want you to kind of think about the roles that each of these people have to play in ensuring that this coffee is up to high quality. It feels repetitive because it bears repeating. That's like my favorite thing about this ProDev. We're saying this thing over and over again so that we really feel like we're grasping the supply chain, right? That farm worker is concerned about quality because they have to harvest it, process it, maintain the farm, keep it in good working and healthy order. We talk a lot about the risks that they have to take, the investments that they have to take at origin, right? If you're washing your coffee, you need to retile your tanks time to time. You need to really resupply. You're talking about composting, you're talking about harvesting, you're talking about all of these organic inputs that really affect the quality of the coffee. You have to prevent it from catching disease. Or if some of your crops do get hit with something really bad, how do you protect the rest of your farm? Lots of risks are happening. Lots of risky things affect the quality of that coffee. When you're a farmer, again, you still have to do all of those things and think about storage, transport, planning. Planning is also that long-term game, right? The viability and good practice of a coffee tree is it's most productive 5 to 20 years. So if half of your farm is hitting year 20, it might be a time to start growing new coffee. Actually, you probably should have done it 5 years ago, so, right? Like, there's a lot of planning out that you have to make. And then certainly there's quality control, tasting, testing, evaluating that coffee as a group, as a cooperative, knowing how you may want to pool your resources or separate out good scoring coffees, because that is going to play a big role in how you market and sell it, and potentially sell it at market. Because if you've got some really good, tasty, competitive coffee, maybe you don't pool that with the rest of the people in the cooperative, because it's going to yield you a bigger price. Lots of choices you have to make as a possible cooperative entity. And then certainly milling, marketing. This is also where quality control plays a big role. You're exporting, you're also training people. Remember how I was talking about this idea of potentially selling fertilizers to your farms? There's a lot of education, my key word here, where there's a lot of education that's happening this way down the line. You're learning from past years. You're learning from other partners. You are exchanging a lot of information, and you are negotiating prices. Hey, how much do you think your stuff is worth so that I can market it to these folks over here? What is that dialogue potentially looking like? And then certainly planning and logistics, which is another purview of that importer. And we do kind of have to think about the financing aspect of that too. How are we paying for all of this? How much cash is being exchanged at every step of this way until it actually gets sold? You know, it's really not until it is sold by a consumer, right, or bought by a consumer, that you really see that final value making its way all the way back. So you're kind of trying to hold back those floodwaters as best you can until it finally gets over here. But think about all that time that it took. Honestly, every supply chain looks very different. In some models, farmers never know who buys their coffee, right? There's a really important kind of concept of, if I'm a smallholder farm, I've heard stories about this when I've gone to Origin, just some guy in a pickup truck drives up, says, hey, give me your coffee, here's some cash, and they never see anyone ever again. Very basic supply chain model from a producer. I don't know, he just comes by, gives me this money, and that's how much I guess my coffee is worth, right? That's one way of thinking about it. There are other models where we're a group and a cooperative where we are collectively bargaining and we are selling and negotiating the price for our coffee because no, it's actually really high quality. You don't have to think about that, right? Or a roaster might try and reach out and direct contract some work, right? Hey, I really love that coffee that we bought from you last year. I want to invest in you. Let's make something happen, right? But that person is not going to the DHL office and shipping all that coffee. You still need all these people along the way. So just because that communication is happening over here doesn't mean you're cutting out any of those other entities along that chain. Also, a farm owner can totally import their stuff into another country. We see this a lot. DC, the training center, we run into a lot of producers from coffee growing countries who are like, yeah, I roast in country and I ship it. What do you think about that? That's interesting, right? That's a totally different model and not one that we at Counterculture necessarily deal with, but it's totally out there. If you want fresh, roasted Vietnamese coffee, like I know that there is a group out there that does that, right? They harvest it and they sell it and they market it to people and consumers in the United States. Every supply chain does look different from one another, but we kind of, I hate to say reduce it, but I want us to kind of talk through 3 models on how coffee can be sold and purchased. Okay, so we've talked about the journey, we've talked about the logistics. Let's start talking about the money, because it's important. I hate to say it. No, I don't hate to say it. It's actually really important. Let's talk about the money. Let's talk about some ways of purchasing and selling coffee. We have to think about purchasing and selling coffee on a spectrum. That's totally why we are, doesn't this just iconographically kind of look like a spectrum? We kind of have to think about the purchasing and buying coffee and selling coffee on a spectrum. At one end, there is a wall between each of the supply chain entities. Like I was saying, that shoe, right? This is the chorus line model. I only see the person in front of me. The actors in the supply chain likely change year to year. So each actor, and when I say actor, again, now I'm mixing my theater metaphors, each entity, each actor here, buys from the previous one with prices that are determined at the moment of sale. So I'm a farmer, maybe a larger entity buys that coffee from me, we talk about it, we negotiate it, that's all I worry about, and then next year I have the same conversation, maybe it's a different price, but that's it. I only see that person in front of me. That person takes it, maybe tries to sell it to an exporter, we negotiate a price, great, it's bought, see you next year. Importer buys it, great, I'm gonna put this on a boat, here's all the logistics stuff, let's sign a contract, let's mill it, let's bag it, let's go. Roaster picks it out, hey, I really want this coffee, we need to fill this sort of model for what we're trying to source this season. What do you got that's fresh? Hey, I just got this coffee in. What do you think? Love it. Let's buy it. Here's how much I'll pay for it. Okay. One. Very one-sided way of thinking about it. So that's one side of the spectrum. We kind of think about that as like a traditional supply chain when it comes to coffee. That's where a majority of these sales and transactions happen. Person to person to person to person, very linear. Other side of the spectrum, everyone knows everyone. I'm a roaster, I know who imported that coffee, I know who exported that coffee, I know the cooperative, I know the producer partners. We all know each other because we're all at the same table having conversations about where that value of that coffee is at what phase of its transport. We get to share information, especially pricing, so that idea of price transparency is really key. And there's a sense of co-responsibility in getting that coffee to succeed. That's really important here too. This is the ideal side of the spectrum, right? Where everyone knows everything. One of the phrases that you kind of maybe hear at the end of that spectrum is something called direct trade. More on this a little later, because that in itself maybe is a little reductive of that model. But first I want to talk about a phrase most well known by coffee consumers regarding coffee selling and purchasing. Fair trade. Fair trade. What do we know about fair trade? Can I get some call outs on fair trade? What do we feel about fair trade? We should feel really good about fair trade. This is not an opportunity for us to hate on or knock down any of these systems, because I want you to kind of think about it. And when we start talking about pricing and the C market, commodity grade coffee, fair trade is an incredibly important facet of the larger global coffee market. Fair trade took off in the later 20th century as a way for people producing commodities like coffee and tea could access a market and sell their products to places like the US and to Europe. So that in itself was it was an entity sort of couple decades ago, I should say, fair trade became an official certification, which is really cool, focused on development in areas where these commodities are produced. For coffee specifically, fair trade has traditionally utilized the establishment of coffee cooperatives. So usually when you buy fair trade certified coffee, it's because fair trade has engaged with a cooperative. So already they are assuming a certain level of interaction between coffee producers at origin. Fair trade efforts have helped, and fair trade price is a mechanism that isn't linked to quality necessarily. That's something to be very clear about, right? Just because it's fair trade doesn't mean it's high quality. What it is saying is it's tethered to pricing. What is the price of this coffee? How much was it bought for? So in some ways, this kind of operates like the C market. Are we familiar with the C market? C stands for commodity. You can look for the C market on the stock exchange. It's volatile, it fluctuates, but it is that kind of, this is what coffee trades at. Regardless of quality, regardless of anything, this is kind of where it's at. It is incredibly volatile. Fair trade model is an attempt to make it less volatile, make it more stable. Fair trade certified farmers are rewarded for good business practices, but not necessarily great coffee. Okay. So who's involved? Who are the entities? Who are the actors when we think about fair trade? There's a group, Fair Trade International. They're in charge of regulating these policies that affect everyone in the supply chain. So you think about it for coffee, you think about it for tea, you think about it for these commodities. Producers, farmers, right? In order to get fair trade label, producers apply for that certification, which requires a fee, and get their license. So they register so that their coffee can be sold with fair trade pricing attached to it. There are also fair trade importers. So importers register with Fair Trade International and pay a fee, and they are required to pay a minimum price for the coffee that they buy from an exporter. So when you think about what that FOB price is, that's because an importer has agreed, I promise, I have bought all the coffee that I bring in for at least this amount. Scouts honor. We were just talking about Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts just a second ago, going on a bear hunt, going on a lion hunt, sorry. Also, exporters are a part of this too. Exporters could be private companies that also register with Fair Trade International and pay the fee, but also producer cooperatives can double as exporters. So if you're a cooperative and you're in this fair trade model, you could be licensed as an exporter and then work with that importer who agrees that they pay you for that certain fixed price. That term direct trade, I just talked about it a little earlier. It's a very broad term, right? This idea of coffee buyers engaging in more areas of the supply chain, not necessarily just talking with the person behind you. More conversations are happening, working towards more open, mutually beneficial forms of trade. Maybe this means higher premiums linked to quality, maybe. Maybe it's about having the farmer and consumer and making sure all the entities are happy. What does happiness mean? How do you grade happiness, right? Exactly. That's very vague. That's like not easy to pinpoint. Direct trade and fair trade are not mutually exclusive. That's another thing to be really key about here. Direct trade ideas came from a motivation to fill in the gaps or even build on top of the foundation that we saw from fair trade. So we love this model. We like this idea of market stability that fair trade provided, but we knew that there was not an association with that quality. So this idea of a direct trade model was something that kind of took that idea and ran with it in another direction. So this idea of direct trade doesn't actually have an industry clear definition. And that's what makes it really fuzzy, right? That term in itself can be very fuzzy. And while we like to boast at Counterculture that we were the first company to adopt the term direct trade, We also tried to back it up with some actions too. So not only were we kind of those first groups to coin the term, but we also looked for third-party certification. We asked another organization to look at our books, to check our work, to see that we were doing it the way we said we were doing it. We were essentially creating a rubric and then hiring a firm to come in and verify that we did it the way we said we would. So despite the fact that we have that third-party kind of designation, and again, this is from like 2008 to 2014. We are not in the year 2014 right now. We're in the year 2019. Because a couple years back, we realized the industry as a whole didn't necessarily adopt it the same exact way that we did. And it wouldn't be fair to say, we are this thing, don't you understand what that is, if no one actually understood what it was. And if it doesn't actually get to the heart of what we do, why put it on the bag? It's a marketing tool more than anything, right? So our real goal was moving from a direct trade model to a transparency backed up model. And so when you think about our transparency report, that plays into and is supported by the foundational work that we did in the first decade of what we did as a coffee roaster, and built upon it in a way that we felt was more fair and more representative of the work that we did, that also didn't just reduce this idea down to sticker, which can be a real challenge for folks. We terminated our direct trade certification in 2014. That's something to be really honest about. And we want to talk about kind of where we went from there. It didn't have an official meaning in the market. So our whole goal was transparency, reporting our FOB prices, remember, at point of export, right? Once it leaves that country of origin, for every coffee we buy, not just the best ones. But is transparency the end-all be-all? Or should we have transparent bags? Should we have clear plastic bags that say this coffee was transparent? No, transparency is a tool that we use to talk about these things, but it doesn't actually get to the heart of those interconnected communications between all these entities along the supply chain. Just because I'm giving you price doesn't actually match with necessarily quality. We are trying to make those connections, but you can't have one without the other. And that's, I think, something really important to talk about. Another model that we've not talked about. So this is me talking about these things in terms of a spectrum, right? There's that, like, that traditional model. There's that ideal, grass is greener fields kind of thing of maybe it's direct, maybe it's transparent, maybe it's just, we're all just trying to look out for each other, right? And then there's spot coffee, which is not a bad word. I think this is another really important thing that we want to stress in this talk. Spot coffee is when roasters, buyers, buy coffee that's already existing in an importer's warehouse. So remember that traditional model, I'm buying from the person behind me, up, down the chain, right? Money is being exchanged. Maybe, though, an importer is the one who purchases that coffee and it sits. So you can go to a green importer, maybe check a catalog and see all the different coffees that they have in their warehouse. And as a roaster, maybe a smallholder or medium-sized roaster, you can say, you know what, I want some coffee. Let me go get some coffee. And rather than go all the way down the supply chain, you just go to the importer, source from that menu, and then roast it and sell it and market it. Coffee is sometimes contracted before harvest, but not contracted by the roasters. So maybe the importers, maybe the exporters were the ones who set that contract with that farm or farm cooperative, and then they're the ones who are kind of holding it and possessing it, so as a means to market it to some potential buyers in the US market or around the world. Buying on the spot means farmers have already been paid for the product. It's a done deal. So any price the coffee is sold at afterwards, whether that was higher or lower than what it was sold for to farmers, does not have the potential to flow back to the farmer. So there's a big wall also between this too. So if I'm an importer and I have all of this coffee, I already paid my farmer for it, and then you as a roaster buy it for double the price, that's money to me, but that's not necessarily money to the farmer. But also, if I paid the farmer for some coffee and I can't sell it, so I gotta do some discounts, I gotta mark it down, that's also not being incurred by that farmer. So again, there are pros and cons to this model, right? Coffee is being processed and sold by farmers to an exporter, from an exporter to an importer, without having the buyer identified or committed to the coffee. That is another way that coffee can be bought or sold. Spot. We'll talk about spot a little later too. Cool. So I kind of touched upon this, right? This idea of a lot has changed since 2014. So how is it that counterculture does this thing? We certainly have an interaction with, they certainly have an interaction with us, but maybe only casually, right? The thing I also like about this image is we're kind of matching. It's harder in this daylight, but you can kind of see the font color is related to who along the supply chain we get to interact with. But you see a lot of color from this side over here and from this side over there and vice versa. Because the idea is all around the system, we are able to manage expectations with everyone along the supply chain. A really great quote from Katie Cargiulo, who's in our coffee department on the West Coast. Our model, both on the sourcing and sales sides, is based on partnerships. Strong partnerships are based on trust, something that is built by working together, but also by sharing information. Transparency pushes honest conversations that can only happen when all parties are looking at the same information. Again, transparency is not the end-all, be-all. You have to back it up with actions and words and deeds. Prices paid for coffee along the supply chain are a great example of why and how transparency is important for our industry as a whole. So this is kind of how we kind of kick off our transparency report, to talk about it as a function of good practice and how we work. All right, let's talk about Golondrina. Do we like it? It's such a good coffee. It's really good. It's like one of my favorites. We have actually been buying from Organica, which is the cooperative group, since 2006. It's really awesome. We've been engaging with this coffee through our direct trade plan. And in fact, if you go back to this image, hey, look at this. This is Golondrina. It used to have that good old direct trade stamp on it. And I think that's really cool. The neat thing about it is Organica consists of about 100 members in Timbío and Piendamo, Colombia. And each landholder ranges from 1 to 20 hectares. So again, we are talking smallholder groups bringing their lands together to produce really good tasting coffee. They obviously harvest, process, maintain the farm, plant, store, transport, you name it. They're the ones doing it. They're also neighbors. They all talk to one another. They all hang out. They've been dealing with us for the last, let me do the math again, 13 years. They know the kinds of things that we like and are looking for because we're able to kind of cascade all that information through to them. So they get to have that direct conversation with us in a way that's really important. And so they get to harvest, process, and maintain the farm in a way that yields this high quality coffee that we're talking about. Organica itself was founded in the 2000s because they really were interested in organic farming. And if we want to talk about farming, we can throw down during Q&A. We did not take too much time dealing with that at the moment, but I think it does bear some kind of like exploration, because that in itself is another type of certification with some really important ramifications about how people grow and what they grow and how much of it they grow. So they're the ones who are processing, but they're also doing some marketing. And that's really cool too. They, as a group, have to sell their coffee to market. Just because we've been buying from them for the last 13 years does not mean we're the ones buying all of their coffee. That's another thing that I cannot stress enough. Counterculture is not buying an entire farm's coffee supply, nor are most coffee roasters out there. You have to think about the diversification of the quality of coffee on an individual farm. You have to think about the different markets that they have to market to. You can get the cream of the crop sold at a certain price. There's a ton of other stuff in between, right? And all of that ideally gets sold by end of year. So how much you can bank ahead of schedule versus at the end. The idea is maximizing profits in a way that helps you weather the storms year in and year out. It's really important, especially for a smallholder farm. And the nice thing about this Organica cooperative is they're thinking about that on a much larger scale. Then we get a really awesome partner called Caravella. Their headquarters is in Bogota. They own a mill in, if you've all had Finca Nueva Armenia, yeah? It's the coffee that we offer. They also have a really cool variety farm, Finca Belgravia. So if you've had Tabi, we did Finca Belgravia Tabi and some other variety selections. So they have a variety farm where they grow different varieties of coffee Arabica to kind of test, see, and potentially market back. Remember that backwards of like, hey, are you interested in growing some of this coffee? Maybe you want to check that out. Maybe you want to diversify your biological, footprint. Maybe you want to kind of experiment with some fun things. Remember, that idea of absorbing risk comes from strong structures like this. If I really just need to sell all my coffee, I'm not trying to do wild experiments or anything like that. But if I know that I have a direct buyer, if I know that a percentage of my crop is guaranteed at a guaranteed price, I am more willing to take some risks because I know some of that risk is either absorbed by my neighbors or it's absorbed by the larger institutions at play. Or if they're like, hey, I just want you to try it and I'm gonna pay for it up front and let's just do this. I think that's a really positive way to really get some exciting new things that came out. I never had Tabi before, but it's because of that commitment and that willingness to kind of push that potential, really like plumb those depths, that you get some really exciting opportunities that come out of that. They certainly mill, they market too. They're the ones who also have to put their foot on the pavement, right? They really have to bust to kind of get that coffee sold. They're also doing quality control. They're giving live feedback to those producing partners. Hey, that coffee tasted really good. Whose was that? Hey, great job. We should all think about this in that way, right? It's getting that collective conversation happening. And they're, of course, doing some training, but also financing. Let's think about how we plan and budget for next year's harvest. Caravella also has a US office in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. That's right down the block from us. We have a really great relationship with them because they're also right down the street from us. We can have a really good conversation because it's happening in real time. That's really awesome for us. They certainly deal with importing, logistics, storage, marketing, quality control, financing too. And then we, again, started buying from them in 2006. And then we're thinking about that forward-facing, how do we get people into Golondrina? Golondrina is that coffee-drinking coffee that we know and love. I get excited about it every year. And it's because of this really awesome model that really plays out in a strong way. Remember how I was talking about fair trade and the sea market and everything like that? I want us to now actually think about this in terms of the actual money. Whoa. This is a very complicated graph, so let me try and digest this for you. See this blue zigzaggy line? This is the sea market for the last 20 years. It gets real bad in 2002, 2003. And I don't know if you all were checking out the news, but the sea market hit something like 87 cents back in September. Not great for coffee, right? Now, this red line, see how it jumps up just a little bit? That is fair trade pricing. Now you could argue, well, wait a minute, sea market was way higher than that. What's going on? But look at the stability. Market stability is what we're talking about. If it's not being linked to quality, it's just saying this is a decent price, and more importantly, this is a decent bottom line price, minimum you should be paying for your coffee. You're not worrying about the market fluctuation. You're not worrying about the stock market tanking and really messing up the game, right? The importance is stability and market stability. That is the goal of fair trade. That's why it's not a bad thing or an ugly thing. It's actually a very vital thing when you think about the economics related to coffee. If we didn't have that, We don't have a floor to stand on or really think about the quality that's associated with it. When you pair that with better buying models, that gets you into a much better place. Now, purple line here, this is Golondrina when we first started buying and reporting out our transparency report. So I want to say this is 2009. This is when we start to tell people how much we paid for it. And look at how it's been growing over the years, right? Because we're linking it to that quality. This is a big jump, is it not? Right? How do you quantify that? That's a real challenge, I think, sometimes. We, as a roaster, think about this a lot. You can't put just like a simple label on it. You can't give an elevator pitch on it. I've now been talking at you for an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm still not even getting to the depth of this, right? This is really hard, and this is really complicated. There's a really cool zine out there that talks about the supply chain. How many pages is it? Have you read it, Daps? 10 to 12 pages. That doesn't even get to the depth of it, right? And yet, it's the first time many of us have really even thought about it. That's what's, I think, so crucial as we kind of think about this. And then over the last few years, we've been talking kind of about what our averages are. Notice how much higher Golondrina is. It's because of that 13-year history that we've had with that coffee. It's been known, it's been trusted, it's been proven time in, time out. We have been having that direct feedback loop with each other. That quality is just growing, and the price gets to match with it. And then if you think about kind of like transactional guides, like on average, $3. Do you remember what our average FOB price was in 2017? Not trying to put anyone on the spot. It's $3.17 for all of the coffees in our market. $3.56 or $3.57 for single origin. Way higher than this red line, way higher than this blue line. Hard to talk about. Okay. Not trying to confuse everyone, but we're going to take a little quick jaunt from Colombia over to Guatemala. Because when we think about what the counterculture way is, it is about building model partnerships. And a really great partner that we talk about a lot is Asuvim. So Manos Campesinas is an umbrella cooperative in Guatemala. The members of Manos are cooperatives themselves who belong to Manos for their dry mill, for their exporting, for their technical assistance, and services provided. We currently buy from Manos's base co-ops, and customers see on our menu coffees like Asuvim or Sipacapa. So if you see those coffees, you know it's from Manos Campesinas. They're one of our least risky partnerships because they tell us everything, down to the price the base co-ops pay for their member farmers. That is something you do not necessarily get from everyone. Just because we're talking to one another, the level of trust you have to have with a producing partnership to say, hey, how much do you pay your farmers? How much do you pay your laborers? That's a really risky question. That's a bold question that I think also most people in a supply chain model don't demand of their farm groups. That in itself is tough. And if you haven't been working with them for a while and you're just like, hey, how much do you ever ask people how much they pay for rent? Right? That's a little personal question, don't you think? Imagine saying like, hey, how much do you pay your workers? Another incredibly risky question. I feel like we as maybe baristas out there are like, whoa, you don't talk that, do you? What? It's weird, right? No, this is what we're looking for. We want that honesty. We want that transparency. FOB, price as it leaves the country, does not get to the heart of how much cash in hand someone gets for making that coffee possible. That is a much bigger ask for a lot of people because of how massive this system is. To get to this level, it takes time because buyers don't ask this information from their supply chains, and even the best intentioned organizations often need time to put systems in place to actively collect and share this data. Imagine the infrastructure you have to build in order for someone to actually accurately report that information out. That's a lot of logistics that people are like, I'm trying to harvest coffee right now. Like, why are you asking me this question? Is this helpful? Well, it is, and we want to know that. So actually, is that right here? Yeah, check this out. Here's the money. Farm gate pricing for an Asuvim member is $2.08 per pound green. Isn't that great? Let's hold on. Where are we at here? $2.08. Okay. That's even still like above that fair trade FOB price. Whoa. Once it gets to the cooperative, co-op gate, that doesn't sound good, does it? It sounds very like Watergate or some co-op gate. $2.42. That little jump, mere 30 cents. But think about what the work is that's happening that they have to do. They're incurring that cost. They're negotiating it for a higher price. Once it actually gets to Manos, that FOB, $3.40. Big dollar jump. Way more logistics. Dry mill, processing, you have to think about all of those things per pound. Once it gets to Royal, that warehouse, $3.69. So again, once it jumps into the United States, shipping, production, holding, storage, climate control, you name it, that is the kind of absorbed cost. But again, it's just a little jump of 20 cents. This is the much bigger jump, don't you see? Full dollar. When it comes to us, we sell it $10.95, wholesale, per pound. That's per pound roasted also. So also you have to think about this green price. It is doing a big transformation. Once you roast that coffee, there's also packaging, marketing, you name it, right? All of that infrastructure and then shipping, delivery systems. And then once it gets to you and that cafe, think about selling a retail bag of Sipakapa or Asuvim, $18.25, something like that. Think of all the absorbed costs, the labor, brewing, right? Making sure that that salary hits where you need to. You can pay your baristas and all of the people in the production side of things. Think about that huge jump, right, throughout this entire chain. But we have to lay it on top of how those quality points actually affect it, right? Here I am saying it again, but just in a different way. This is a great model because we get all this information. And everyone along this step is crucial in maintaining that quality, which justifies that $18.25 when you sell that retail bag. So again, our sourcing philosophy itself has transformed over a long period of time. It's grown organically. It's a gradual development over our history as a company. I really like this quote, "Counterculture doesn't just find great coffees, we work with producers to make great coffee happen." That is an important paradigm shift. We need to hear from them, that two-way street, that education. We're learning from them about what makes sense for them, just as much as we are telling them what makes sense for us. And we learn a lot. And we're also learning from our peers in the coffee industry. You have to think about what the size of Counterculture is relative to all the other coffee companies out there, and US roasters, and international roasters, right? How are they manipulating that same coffee? It's really important for us to learn from them as well. Much of how we buy our coffee also comes from our position in the context of the coffee market. So we have to think about where do we sit in the market here in the States. The way our model works, we're paying for a lot of that coffee up front before we sell it to market. There are other models that choose not to do that. So the risk is on us sometimes, especially when we work with our farming partners. And because we're independently owned and operated, that puts us in a unique position as well. That's why it is impossible for us to say, ours is the end-all be-all. Just because we have been doing this for 23 years, and certainly we roast about 1 million kilos a year. That's a lot, but it's not the biggest company out there. So if you actually kind of like go to our transparency report, you can pull up what our FOB price is and everything like that. We tell you a lot of that information, tell you what our partnerships are, when do we harvest it, how long we've been buying it. But the thing I really want to kind of like pop in there is this spot, beginning, and model. Remember that ideal, the CCC way that I was sort of showing you? Like, boy, that Asuvim supply chain, we really like that. Do all of our coffees follow that model to a T? Not necessarily. Actually, 49% of the coffees in 2017 hit this model status. It's part of the model, but it is not model. 48% are those beginning relationships. The ones where we need to build a little more trust with each other to get a little more of that information from one another. Exchange those ideas, share those ideas. And 3%, we buy spot. Spot is not a dirty word. Spot is something that's incredibly essential. Spot, we want to make sure we're buying spot coffee from importers who do their work, who can tell us that story, who can be very transparent about how they bought that coffee and where they bought it from, right? The hope is that you buy good coffee from a good importer, and we try our best to reduce that as much as possible. But when we are paying for coffees up front, when we are incurring that risk, what happens when a farm that we were going to source for one of our year-round coffees gets hit with a flood or leaf rust or something like that? We need something to fill that on our menu. And we will buy and source in a way that feels right. But obviously, we don't buy 100% spot for that reason too, because we want to make sure that we can vet that and have a little more control over that buying model. Within this, it is important to also consider the depth of what our model relationships look like. 73% of those coffees we bought in 2017 came from lot separations specifically for counterculture, which means we can buy a higher volume of that coffee because they made special considerations for the type of coffee that we want. And we can plug in coffees of different quality into our spectrum, which is really cool. Which really means it's good stewardship of the relationships that we have with producing partners. Like I said, transparency is just one piece of this larger puzzle. Most importantly, and the kind of like takeaway that I wanted you to kind of get from this is, again, ours is not the end-all be-all because our model is growing and changing organically. We need to evolve our understanding of the supply chain and even what our individual role is in it. Quality is a really cool thing to think about, and quality itself is a shifting definition. One of the things that I think about too at counterculture, like we've had to redefine what our understanding of quality is when we do things like invest in something like a color sorter. It allows us to potentially buy more coffee from a producer and sort in the States and sort of raise some of those quality points in a way that changes our dynamic, changes the way we think about quality or buying quality in a way that actually benefits more people in our production chain, in our supply chain. The more information we can provide about supply chain models to you guys and coffee professionals helps us move the conversation forward. And it promotes our internal and external scrutiny about the chain as a whole. Like I said, we constantly need to define and redefine what it means to be a model partner. Are we a model partner? Maybe right now. Maybe 2 years from now, that's not good enough, and we need to change how we do things. Just as we need to maybe change our expectations from producing partners, from importers, from exporters, we need to constantly change our understanding of what that means, which means analysis and reanalysis of what it means to be sustainable and high quality. Those things mean very different things now than they did 10 years ago, and especially with factors like climate change, that is going to be a whole different ballgame 2 years from now. Right? What can we get that is high quality? What does high quality even mean 2 years from now? We just don't know. So it's really indicative of kind of where we've grown for the last few years, but again, that is for this size company at this phase of our history at this moment in time, and that could be a completely different outlook years from now. So that is it. which is really cool. I don't expect any of you to look at the URLs here and like type them out or anything like that. But what's really important for us kind of at the end of all of this is to provide our homework that we did. Also, anyone read the Daily Coffee Report? Did you see an article maybe like a week ago that Colombian coffee farmers are thinking about alternative models to the C market? That in itself is proof positive about why we're having this conversation right now. Because the landscape is changing underneath our feet. People are rejecting even the traditional models of how coffee is bought and sold in real ways. And the more market access and the more negotiations and the more advocacy that people have at origin, they can also set new terms. And as those terms change, how do we change with it? I think that's another really cool thing that kind of sets this into an incredibly relevant time right now. This is exactly why we're trying to talk about this thing right now. So again, if you want some of this information, I'm happy to share it with you after class. But that's the formal end of this. Yeah. Again, the whole point is not to pat ourselves on the back or anything like that, but really take a lot of these ideas and concepts and think about how we can enact some sense of change or literacy on this supply chain in a more effective way. The more we can talk about it more clearly, and you can apply a lot of these ideas to other supply chain models for other products out there. I mentioned we're talking about coffee. Think about how it applies to tea. Think about how it applies to, did a tasting at 10 about chocolate, right? All the products that we buy that could be considered commodity, right? We have to think about how it actually gets in our hands. It's so crucial. So that's it, y'all.